Bring this meeting to order. Welcome everybody, and welcome everybody out there in virtual land, I guess you could say. Morgan.
Morgan isn't here. I guess we should have started with that. Morgan is on vacation. Susan, for the first time, no pressure, Susan, on live TV, is going to be handling the roll call.
You guys see the look of panic in my face. Oh, no.
Ms. Friedman,
Here?
Mr. Arnold,
Here.
Ms. Banks. Here. Ms. Bell,
Here.
Mr. Brown, Ms. Carter, Mr. Denied,
Here.
Reverend Gordon,
Here.
Ms. Harding. Here. Ms. Howe,
Here.
Ms. Mendoza-Locke, Mr. O'Connor,
Here.
Ms. Rodriguez, Dr. Russell, Mr. Stengel,
Here.
Mr. Tiggs, Major White. Here.
Thank you very much. And recognition of our visitors. Let's start with you, Richard. Richard Arnold.
Lynette? Visitors?
Lynette here, Road Properties.
Carol?
I will go. Hello, Carol Conlon representing the Lucas County Guardianship Services Board.
Lucas County Probate Court.
Well, and welcome. Next will be moving on to the oath
We,
of office.
yeah, we have Judge Pufferberger here again. Once again, he's been a regular fixture here, gracious to perform our oath of office for David Knowles. Judge, take it away.
It's a pleasure to be here once again, and every time I come, I thank you folks for the work you do for our community. We all appreciate it. People don't always say that, but I think most of us out there know it. Thank you for what you do. And this is really good, because I administer a lot of oaths, and sometimes you don't know how many words to go in advance so people can follow. Now, Mr. Silak here is pretty sharp, so you get your own copy here to follow along with. So if I go too slowly, you can speed me up, or if you go too quick, if I go too quickly, you have the words, and so we can follow along. But David, if you'd please raise your right hand, please repeat after me. I, David Knowles, do solemnly swear
I, David Knowles, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully support the Constitution of the United States
that I will faithfully support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and that I will perform my duties
and I will perform my duties
as a member of the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board
as a member of the Mental Health Recovery Services Board
of Lucas County
of Lucas County
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Could you get a picture, Judge? David, can we get a picture?
Sure. Where
That would be great, I think.
We'll get a picture. See, just the.
Could we get one with the mask,
Yeah.
if you don't mind?
Gotta get both of my hairs back in place.
Got it.
Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you for serving.
Thank you.
Judge, any party comments?
Not really. We're plugging away, trying to see if COVID could end, but once again, we're moving forward, trying to figure out in our court when we can get hearings going again. We're still moving forward. You're in the same place. I know you have a lot of people online here, and once again, I really am honored to be here. This is, I know almost all of you actually, and sometimes you're on a board, you don't realize because people don't tell you that they appreciate what you do. But this is really important stuff. It's really important stuff. And you know, I'm in a probate court, so I mean, we have 2 cases coming in today, or one today, one tomorrow, to the DD board, that were, you know, kind of emergency situations. And I know in your field also, emergency situations come up, and our court certainly wants to be there help in any way we can. So I'm glad we have such a great relationship with Scott and your entire board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Judge. In your board packets are the minutes. Were there any changes? Edits? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second.
I didn't go through first and second. did it?
I seconded. Oh,
Susan, I
Stangle motion.
was motion.
And for the record, it was my job to track that.
Oops.
It's a vote of thank you, Jim, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Susan, if you will roll call.
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carter, Mr. Janai,
Yes.
Reverend Gordon,
Yes.
Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Howe,
Yes.
Mr. Knowles,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Stangle,
Yes.
Major White.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And next we'll turn it over to Jenny for our financial forecast.
Okay, I'm gonna direct you to pages 8 through 10 of the packet. Normally, I come to you with our financial statements, which is a look back of the previous month, what has happened. This is our financial forecast for the next 5 years. So our financial forecast is based on assumptions. So we make assumptions about what we are expecting to happen over the next 5 years. On pages 8 and 9 are descriptions of some of the highlights in our financial forecast. And then page 10 is our actual projected numbers for the forecast. I'm gonna go through just a couple of the highlights. I'm not gonna read everything to you. I'm sure you have already read it. We've got the packet. For revenue, the biggest change from what I presented to you in October is in our local levy revenue. We received updated numbers from the county auditor's office with updated tax rates and property values. So that actually increased, I want to say it was close to 600,000 from what was projected previously for fiscal years 22 through 26. And then in the other revenue, we have our federal revenue. Some of the biggest pieces there are our state opioid response, which you've heard again and again and again. And we have that forecasted through fiscal year 22 and then a partial year in fiscal year 23, as that is when that grant is scheduled to end. And then Engage 2.0 revenue is only a partial year in fiscal year 22. In our state funding, we have state funding forecast to be consistent for fiscal year 22 and 23. The state will begin a new biennium in fiscal year 2024. So we took what we know for fiscal year 22, have it also in fiscal year 23, and then we took that at a 25% reduction for 24 and going forward. Since we don't know the state's plan going forward, we don't know what's going to be happening with the new biennium budget, we have a 25% reduction from fiscal year 23 months. Are there any questions on the revenue before I jump into expenses?
Jenny, this assumes levy renewal, correct?
Yes, yes. On the expenses, I do have the fiscal year 22 approved allocations that were part of our purchasing plan included. Increases in grant funding is projected at 2% for our grants, assuming that they're meeting desired program indicators, performance indicators. Any potential changes from this packet, from our 120-day notices, programmatic changes for fiscal year 23 are not included in the forecast. So fiscal year 23 is basically kept the same as fiscal year 22 with a 2% increase. Funding for our crisis services was also updated from the last forecast I presented to you. For fiscal year 22, we have it at what was approved by the board, $5,177,178. And then in fiscal year 23, we have it at just over 5.6 million, and then it's projected at a 2% increase thereafter for the next years. We do have our grant underspending that is expected already built into our forecast. So when you look at the numbers on page 10, that is the expenses minus what we would expect for underspending for our purchase of service and our programmatic grants. In our purchase of service, we are expecting that to be underspent by about $250,000 annually. And like I said, that's already built in. And then in our administrative costs, we projected that based on our current organization chart and a 3% increase for salaries, employer expenses, and a 5% increase for health insurance going forward from fiscal year 22 onward. And like I said, the numbers are on page 10. And you can see on page 10, fiscal year 21 is our actual numbers in the first column there. And then I have our projected numbers from there on out. So it starts with the revenue, it subtracts off the expenses, and then if there's a surplus or a deficit, it has our beginning balance and then what our ending balance is. The ending balance then becomes the beginning balance for the next year. So you can see what our ending balance ends up. By fiscal year 2026, our projected ending fund balance is just over 9.3 million. And this is information only. There is no motion, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Anybody have any questions for Jimmy?
The next item is the minimum board operating fund balance, which is on page 11. This is also information only and goes along with our financial forecast. So we have in the policy operating fund balance preservation. It states that we are going to review annually what our minimum operating fund balance would be. And it's currently set at 8.9 million, and we have no recommendation to change that based on our financial forecast. It was set in February 2018, and we reviewed it every year since then. It's basically, when we set it in fiscal year 18, it was basically set up to be 120 days of operating cash. So should anything happen and we would need to notify our agencies, it was based on what our needs would be for the 120 days before we give our agencies notice. And I am happy to answer any questions anyone has on that. Like I said, we have no recommendation to change it from 8.9 million.
Any questions? Moving along, Scott?
Hello, everyone. I'll draw your attention to the middle of page 11, whistleblower activity report. We're just doing some housekeeping here. Our whistleblower policies suggest that if there is a violation, that we should be reporting that to the board chair and the treasurer and the full board. And of course, doing a activity report at least annually. I can tell you that that has not been occurring routinely. So we're going back and we're cleaning up some items. The last time we presented the whistleblower report was on May 1st of 2017. And we can account for May 1st through 17 through February 10th, 2022. There were no known whistleblower related incidents or allegations of accounting or financial impropriety. So we had no one come and present a claim under the whistleblower policy. So this is information only. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hearing none, moving along to Sammy.
Good afternoon. I am at the bottom of page 11. And this is, if it seems like we very recently came to you with the annual report to be approved in 2020, because we want to get in the cycle of doing this earlier. So this is the annual report on pages 12 through 22 of our annual report, fiscal 21. This was designed actually by Cranio and Mr. Lucas's team. We always think that they do a fantastic job. What's required is the fiscal accounting, which is toward the back of that report. And there is a motion at the bottom of page 11 for us to approve this and send it to all the places that it needs to be sent.
I move for its approval.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Second.
Thank you, Linda. Susan?
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Denai,
Yes.
Reverend Gordon,
Yes.
Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Howe,
Yes.
Mr. Knowles,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Stengel,
Yes.
Major White.
Yes. Thank you. And Scott, you're going to tell us about policy review.
Sure. Draw your attention to page 23. We have 18 policies listed, 7 public affairs policies, and 11 privacy and security policies. I think the biggest change that we're seeing is between the first 2 policies, the community forum policy. We're recommending deletion of that policy and basically importing that language into our citizens' participation in planning policy. We've also added DEI and B language into that policy. Client's recommendation for advice policy, we've added DEI and B and CQI efforts in. The open meetings compliance policy and the public access to board records policies have had minimal changes, but have been reviewed by the Lucas County Prosecutor's Office and have been approved through them. And then we have our HIPAA privacy and security policies. You see that mostly there aren't any substantial changes to that. But one policy I'll draw your attention to, policy 12, that's listed there, client rights to request confidential communications from board. We've expanded that potential use of alternative communication means at the client's request. That's part of our DEI and B efforts as well. Item 12 added, item 14 added governing rules regarding confidentiality. And then 15 simply added a requirement to review the policies on a routine basis. So not a lot of changes to this group. We probably need about 30 more policies to be reviewed by the end of April. We've been staging the policies in as we can to kind of keep you kind of fresh in reviewing the policies, but understanding that if we give too many changes, too deep of things, that it kind of gets lost a bit. So we've been picking our policies. The next group of policies, though, we're probably going to be hitting some of the heavier personnel-related policies, the benefits policies, the non-healthcare related benefits policies, work hours, things like that have been impacted by COVID somewhat, and will be reviewed as a part of not only our COQ process, culture equality process, but also related to our interim strategic plan about, if you remember that conversation about what we liked about what we ended up on our response to COVID, what we want to keep, and then what we want to get rid of. So that is where we start to integrate those discussions into our policy process. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions and bring your attention to the motion on page 24.
Any questions? I would just like to make a statement. I know that this is such a tedious process to go through, but so necessary, and I commend you, Scott, and this incredible team that you have that, in my experience of working with them, paid so much close attention to every little detail, and I'm just impressed. Thank you so much for your work.
You're welcome. And if I may remind everybody, so our internal process is such that the departments in which those policies are kind of governed takes first review of them. So Cammie and her team will review the policies and they'll make recommendations to me. We'll clean them up a little bit, and then Morgan kind of coordinates it as the maestro of the process, and she'll clean it up once we get them to her. And then prep them. So it truly is a team process. And Susan has a role in reviewing all the policies and making sure that we're doing what we need to do as well. So it truly is a team effort.
Yeah, well, it shows in the quality of policies as well. So, next on our agenda, Amy?
This requires a vote.
We need a
Oh, this
vote.
requires a vote.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Janai,
Yes.
Reverend Gordon,
Yes.
Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Howe,
Yes.
Mr. Knowles,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Stengel.
Yes.
Major White.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan. And now, we can move on to Amy.
Hi, everyone. We're on page 25 in the packet. It's not only long, 25 and 26. Our health officer advisory group met recently to review applications for new applicants as well as renewal applicants. They're all listed there on page 25. There's a total of 7 new candidates as well as 11 renewals. And we actually have a new agency who we went into contract with for the purpose of designating health officers, and that is the Ohio Treatment Center. So the list of 6 or 7 clinicians that they have listed there is their first set of health officers for that agency. And on page 26 is an updated demographics chart for your review to look at. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, there is a motion listed on page 25.
Any questions? Do we have a motion to approve? Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, John. Susan?
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Janai,
Yes.
Reverend Gordon,
Yes.
Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Howe,
Yes.
Mr. Knowles,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Stengel,
Yes.
Major White.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan. And Scott, we're going over to you.
Yeah, so the next 2 are mine. I'm gonna take, the first one is for information only. It is the trustee attendance update. So we haven't presented this in a while, but we do want to assure ourselves that we are monitoring our own attendance, and communicate the transparency of our attendance to our stakeholders. So what you'll see here is, beginning of February 21, rolling forward, board attendance, which is the first page on page 27. Now, I want to remind you that a good portion of this time was every other week board meetings, so twice a month. Consequently, we've had several trustees that have hit the benchmark for missing four board meetings annually, and will be receiving the obligatory notification of that notice. So those will be going out next week. If you are looking at this and you see 4 purple marks in your line, you know that you're going to get one of those letters. Now, the good news is that we communicate that to the appointing authorities, and they usually call us and say, hey, what's going on? And we will explain the absences, and we've not seen any action taken to date. That doesn't mean we want to be lackadaisical in our attendance, and of course, we usually have very good attendance, so that's not really an issue. And it is very helpful now that for the first time in a couple of years, we actually have a full 18-member board with the addition of Mr. Knowles. So we have really no issues with gaining our quorum when necessary. And then, of course, the second page is just a summary of the committee attendance. This is information only.
Thank you very much. And then you say that repeat that, right?
Sure, stay with me here, top of page 29. It is my hope that this is the last time you will see this request. We're just doing some cleanup work on our legal situation. As you all know, those charges were voluntarily withdrew several weeks ago now. We're still engaging with our legal team to clean up any loose ends. And we've hit the mark of where we're at in the allocation. I believe that an additional 20,000 will help us accomplish what we want to accomplish through the end of our engagement with our legal team. And so we're requesting an additional 20,000. So the total amount in the motion is increasing the Frank Hickman contract for legal representation in an amount not to exceed $345,000.
Scott, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Calvin.
Second.
Second, Emma, thank you. And Susan?
I'm sorry, there's not a space for that one.
Just go ahead and make one. There you go.
Mr. Arnold,
Abstain.
Ms. Banks, Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Denine,
Yes.
Reverend Gordon,
Yes.
Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Howe,
Yes.
Mr. Knowles,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Stengel,
Yes.
Major White.
Yes. Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, everyone. And next, we're going to Q&A.
Okay, now we're on page 29, and for the next few pages, I do want to go over what exactly this is, and particularly for the board members who've not been through this process. But around this time annually, we review, as part of our purchasing plan, if there are programs or amounts for programs that we currently fund that may need to be revised for the next fiscal year. And that's written into our agency agreement. That's renewal with substantial changes. So we had it's kind of a two-part thing. We've got the 120-day notices, and then the next section, which I won't get into right now, is the actual agency agreement. and the other tree that you picked up essentially, which has the revised language in it. There's a lot of language in there that the attorneys, after reviewing the agreement, suggested that we make changes to, and we're calling that changes to the base language. So because there are substantial changes therein, what we're recommending, what the attorneys are recommending, is that every agency that's funded with an agency agreement get this 120-day notice. So if you recall, or if you're newer to the board, Ohio Revised Code requires that we give 120 days notice to those contracts that we either intend to renew with substantial changes or if we intend to not renew. So at this point, we're just saying every agency that has an agency agreement should get a 120-day notice for their fiscal 23 contract, because in the next section, you'll see the number of substantial changes that have been recommended to the agency agreement. But also, there are some specific programs that we would have come to you anyway to recommend a 120-day notice for programmatic reasons. Upon reviewing their results, there were some things that we need to work out, and or because there are some financial changes that we want to make. So I do want to go through those, and I want to allow for any questions. So please feel free to stop me if there's a question about what it is, or if there's lack of clarity of what I'm explaining. Okay, so on page 29, just starting with a renewed mind, we've got a proposed change for their fiscal 23 contract that we reduce their purchase of service allocation by $114,600. And the reason is that we believe that they're going to underspend by that amount. Okay? The next one, Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center. For this, we're actually proposing to increase their allocation, the purchase of service allocation, by $18,283, because they're going to spend more than that. It's just based on what their numbers are trending and what they've reached out to us to say they're going to spend more than that.
So I had just a quick question. So let's just go back to the renewed line. We're anticipating that they're going to underspend.
Correct.
But once we give them that 120-day notice, they could correct things to get their spend back up.
Yeah, and
Is that how, it's just a reminder?
Yep, I'm
Okay.
glad you asked that, because there is a very formal process as determined by Ohio Revised Code, that just because we're giving the notice doesn't mean that that's the final. That means that now it's a negotiation process. I'm really glad that you asked that question. So the agencies can come back and say, well, actually, we're projecting something different now, and we renegotiate it that way.
Why are they underspending? They're not seeing enough people, they're not,
May I defer to
like a renewed
finance?
mind.
There are a number of reasons, and you're actually going to see as Cami goes through this, that a majority of our purchase of service allocations are underspending. And there's a number of reasons. Some of it is the trends, some of it is, people are going other places, people have different payer sources. We are seeing across the board for most of our agencies that they're projecting to underspend.
Okay, any other?
So a lot of that would be due to COVID and just the people not wanting to expose themselves and.
Well, I think that would be a speculation on our part. What we do know
Okay.
is that there are a number of, there's a workforce issue. For instance, I was talking to the CEO of Harbor just the other day, and she made mention that there are 100 positions down.
Wow.
So that obviously impacts your ability to generate revenue. And I would think that that's similar for our larger agencies.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're on Zoom right now nodding their heads going, yep.
Yep.
So,
You know, the workforce is an issue.
That's especially a concern given COVID, when there are so many more people
Yeah.
in need of mental health services than there were pre-COVID.
Mhm.
So
It's a huge concern.
I take it that somebody is doing something to try to address this.
It is a continuous conversation that we have at the state level related to workforce, because it is not unique to Lucas County. No one, unfortunately, no one has a very good answer. We've been advocating for a couple of things. The first thing we've been advocating for is an increase in the Medicaid rates. Because they're still operating on Medicaid rates from 2016, and of course, we're 6 years later, and we can look at their audits, folks, and see that they're spending more on everything, not just staff, but paper and pencils and rent, and everything costs more. So if you're generating old rates, you can't pay the competitive wage that you need to attract or retain employees. So those employees are moving and they're bouncing around from place to place. A lot of them are going into private. Now, thankfully, from what I hear from the providers is that they're also starting to move back into the public system. But that isn't happening in, mass numbers right now. The second thing is this unfettered growth of Medicaid-only agencies. Ohio Mass allows organizations to, if you meet the minimum criteria of the certification, you can become an agency. Well, that splits the workforce. So we see more agencies related to alcohol and drug treatment services, because the reimbursement rates for alcohol and drug services are more lucrative than they are on the mental health side. Folks, it wasn't long ago that those rates were switched, where it was more lucrative on the mental health side. So we need to regulate that growth because of need. Now, if someone can tell me how many detox beds we need for Lucas County, or how many outpatient treatment slots we need for Lucas County, and set the agency numbers and capacities to those, then that makes sense, right? But those numbers don't exist, and that planning doesn't exist, so anybody who meets the criteria can become an agency. And so those two things, in my opinion, are the things that are most impactful with our agency's ability to attract and maintain workforce.
I see a few agents, maybe 2 or 3 agencies on here that I have tried to call for various reasons. And everybody has nowadays push 1, push 2, push 3, push 4, and hold. And, I don't have a lot of patience, but if you're somebody who's looking to get an appointment for treatment, they're gonna get very frustrated when you're on hold for 25 minutes and you still get nobody. So I would think that if the agencies want to get more clients and are able to handle them with their staff, that maybe they should put more money into that front line there, getting somebody to answer that phone and making an appointment for someone. Just a comment.
Absolutely, I agree with that. It is challenging, that, again, we're back to workforce, how do you take it,
But where do you distribute it?
I know
Distribute it at the
personally,
front door?
my experience has been just talking with people. I know people who have listed positions as looking for a controller and received 0 applications. It's hard to believe, right? It's hard to think about that, that 0 resumes come through over a 3-week period. And that's putting it on Indeed and all those ZipRecruiter and all those fancy websites that I don't know that much about, that supposedly hundreds of people go to for a job. And I mean, it just boils down to where can we find someone to answer the phone? It's a challenge. With the openings here, Scott. you experienced it, so.
Okay, so we are at Harbor. There's one on page 29, and then at the top of page 20, these are programmatic discussions. No estimate of financial impact, but that they aren't meeting the number of people to be served for the Community Senior Program, which we refer to as WISE, and the Heroin Opiate Initiative Program. So what we're looking forward to is a negotiation of how those programs can be revamped so it fits more with the environmental state, and then they have the ability to reach people. Neighborhood properties, this is for the adult care facility program. Here again, no change necessarily for their budget amount, but the same issue as with the previous, in that they're not serving the number of people. So we want to see how that program might need to be revamped in order to get people housed. Also, rental assistance program at NPI, same thing. Talking about how we can look at the program and see how they can serve more people as contracted. New concepts, this is what Jenny was discussing, that the purchase of service amount is estimated to be underspent. And so we're proposing a reduction by $81,000 for next year. Task of Northwest Ohio, their reentry project. And here we're looking at a reduction of $58,000 for next year, as well as revamping the program, because their numbers are they're not hitting the number of people to be served. And it could be environmental, but those are discussions that we need to have. UMADOC Lucas County, this is another purchase of service where we are proposing to reduce that contract by $5,000 because of the projected underspending. And then finally on page 31, ZEP Center. And this is to include the crisis funding into the agency agreement. Currently, it's a technical thing, but we have a separate contract for the crisis services. So now we're proposing to put it in their agency agreement. And what we're also saying is that amount is subject to negotiation based on decisions on the nature and timing of crisis services. So in this tome that you're looking at, there are the letters for each of the agencies that detail the notice. So the actual notices are in here, but we wanted to just state that there's one notice that is sort of representative of several. So the example for ABLE, or Advocates for Basic Legal Equality, is enclosed to represent the identical notices to be sent to Adelante, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Learning Club, Mercy, NAMI, Swanton, Svenia, St. Paul's, Warner Center, and Unison. And it's only essentially because it's the exact same one, just changing the names at the top. The rest of them have that detail that we just went over. And then on pages 31 and 32 are the numerous motions for you to consider.
Scott, can we keep these all together?
I
or-
believe, though you all can correct me if we're wrong, we cannot take them all together, but I believe we can take the first 6 together, and then the last one, task, would be separate. Is that correct? Okay.
Do I have a motion to approve the first 6?
So moved.
We've got Brian and Lisa. Got it. Thank you.
Question. Cammy, in the middle, back on page 29, in the middle there, in the first paragraph under 120-day notices, it says that the agreement will be effective July 1 of 23.
Correct.
Okay.
No, 22.
22.
Yeah, that's,
22,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Fiscal 23.
Fiscal year 20.
Yeah,
Yes, it's
right,
not a year
but
plus 120
but-
days.
Where's that at?
120 days.
in the middle, on page 29, in the middle, that first paragraph under 128-day notices, the penultimate sentence in that paragraph.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so the
20.
changes will be
22.
for fiscal 23, which means we're still in the year 22. July 1st, 22. Thank you, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you. We have a first and a second.
Mr. Arnold,
Yes,
Ms. Banks? Yes. Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Denai?
Yes.
Reverend Gordon?
Yes.
Ms. Harding? Yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Knowles?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
yes,
Mr. Stengel?
Yes.
Major White?
Yes.
Thank you. And do we have a motion to approve the last 120-day notice for health?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you.
Mr. Arnold?
abstain,
Ms. Banks? Yes. Ms. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Denai?
Yes.
Reverend Gordon?
yes,
Ms. Harding? Yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Knowles?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Stengel?
Yes.
Major White?
Yes.
Thank you. And do I have a motion to go into?
No, we got one more.
One more?
Agency
Oh, sorry.
agreement.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, now we are on page 59. So at the back of the packet, this is the agency agreement that we alluded to in the previous section. And regarding the base contract language changes. Do we have, is the attorney going to go over this?
Yeah, Frank is on Zoom. If we could get him up here.
And regarding your
Hey, Frank.
contract language, do we have?
Okay, so Frank is on Zoom. If you could, all right, so we got a delay here that's not gonna work very well. Frank, can you call my cell phone, please? And we're gonna mute you so that we don't get that feedback loop. All right, so we got a delay here. 10 seconds, in case I cuss. Okay, can everybody hear him, Frank?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear.
Everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So Frank, can you walk us through, I'm sorry, Tammy, go ahead.
Oh, sure. No, you were gonna say the same thing I would. Is Frank, if you wouldn't mind just going through each of the recommended changes to the base contract language. That's where we are on page 59, and everybody does have a copy of the agency agreement should we need to reference any pages.
Okay. To give you the large picture, this contract has been, I'm getting feedback. Are you getting feedback?
Tell him to mute his Zoom
Yeah.
if he's on it.
Mute your Zoom, Frank.
What's that?
Mute your Zoom. Can you try that?
I did.
Oh, you
I
did?
Or just shut off the Zoom altogether.
Maybe try shutting Zoom off altogether.
Okay, I'll leave Zoom.
No,
No,
Wait,
hold on.
no, don't do that.
in the meeting room, or the private room.
We're gonna put you back in the private room. That sounds not so good. I think I stepped into that
He's
one.
gonna hit join the meeting room.
Join the meeting room.
Yeah, hit join on Zoom.
Hit join on Zoom.
I don't see the signal yet, but
Well, then I would say go ahead and bounce out and then we'll come back in for executive session.
so you want me to go ahead and talk about what I can with the feedback?
Yeah, we're not getting any feedback here, Frank.
Okay, well, that's fine then, let's not worry about it.
Okay.
You could lower your volume on your feedback or Zoom if you wanted.
So the big picture here is that this contract had a lot of sections that grew, it sounded like, over time. And it was, I think, there were a lot of things that were repeated and that were in different places that belong together. So we did a pretty thorough look at the whole document and decided on changes that are put in there with the expectation that, subject to your approval, of course, that the fiscal year 2004 contract would be completely up to date and has all of the things that we want. The main things are in here, but I see this as a significant first step, but further review, I think, would be appropriate. So going through in order of, in order of the 120-day notices, we added some definitions that were referenced. The main one would be applicable law and applicable requirements. There were sections all over the contract that says this is what you have to follow. And we put them all in one place and are referencing that definition when we're talking about what has to be followed. The diversity report is something that's very important, and we define what that is. So the second area that was pretty thoroughly redone had to do with procedures under Chapter 5122 of the revised code that covers involuntary and voluntary commitments or voluntary hospitalizations. I think the current language covers all of the various functions in accordance with the statute and in accordance with the resolutions that you passed. I don't remember when, but I think this is now in good shape. Section 3.1 is an example of an old section that listed a bunch of things, but other requirements were in other sections, and now it all refers to applicable requirements and current standards. The Medicaid review process is something that needed tightening up to ensure that it's clear what the provider has to do when they are going to get paid. And there is a new requirement that benefits be retroactive to 90 days prior to the date of application. Typically, Medicaid is effective on the date of application, but if requested, it can be retroactive, and that's a new the old contract had several sections that dealt with reasons for withholding payment. And we put these into a single place and I think made them clear and consistent, which was not the case before. Then when there's going to be changes in contract requirements or termination of the agreement during the term of the agreement, those sections needed to be tightened up and consolidated. So there's now clear it's now clear when a party can terminate the contract midstream without 120-day notice. And the notice requirements are clearly defined and timelines are clearly defined. They were in there before, but they weren't very clear and they weren't necessarily consistent. Section 8.6, which talks about the content of the 120-day notice, now tracks the language of the revised code. We had additional requirements that became an issue in the litigation with rescue, but it's now exactly as defined in statute. I don't think it's going to change a whole lot in most situations, but it will be, I think, it's now consistent exactly with the statute, and there's no additional requirements. Sections on dispute resolution, consolidated resolution are disputes that are subject to the 120-day notice, and then disputes that do not fit within that, and they are now all in the dispute resolution section. There's a whole slew of technical changes. Will turns into shall. There were some cross references that were not accurate that have been fixed. And that covers the main changes. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Frank. Do we have any questions?
Of course, when we talk about dispute resolution procedures, is there a defined entity that we would be going to for that dispute resolution, i.e. court of competent jurisdiction, an arbitrator?
I didn't hear that.
Frank, we're talking about the last section, 8.6, I think it is?
8.8.
8.8, sorry. Dispute resolution, is there a specific entity that would help us resolve the dispute? Arbitration board, mediator, etc.
The statute contemplates the Department of OMAS being the source of mediation if the parties request it. There is no other mechanism that I'm aware of.
And there's no need to reference that, correct?
It's a,
Did I answer the question?
yeah, he said, he asked if there was any need to reference it.
Well, 8.7D references that either party may submit to Ohio Laws for advisory mediation.
And is that making, is the added section 8 referring back to 8.7D?
It's, Frank, is the added section 8.8 referring back to 8.7D?
Hang on.
Because that deals with just renewal and non-renewal disputes, and A deals with other disputes.
Frank?
So 8.8
Is other,
used to be 10.15 and we moved it up here. That covers disputes that are not connected to
Renewal.
substantial changes or non-renewal. So your question is, does that incorporate Ohio Department of Drug and Alcohol? No, it doesn't.
So I think that goes back to the initial question, is to whom do we look for the mediation?
The Ohio OMAS is the answer to the question for the non-renewal or disputes involving substantial changes.
Right.
If there's a desire to include that in 8.8, it's no big deal.
Well, I guess the question is how, let's assume for a second we're dealing with an 8.8 dispute. And there's the obligation for the parties to make a good faith effort to resolve it through some means. What is that means or mechanism? What are we suggesting it should be? Or would we like it to be?
That section does not define the process. Use best efforts. And there is no further guidance.
So the question is, do we want there?
no,
So,
because ultimately it is our decision. It's our money, our decision. We want to partner with our providers, but in a dispute that is unrelated to the 120-day renewal, non-renewal, it should be ultimately this board's authority to make that final decision.
the board makes a decision?
The board always makes the decision.
But a mediator is not making a decision. They're really just a facilitator. So the question is, who facilitates?
So traditionally, we sit down face to face with the providers and have the discussion about what needs to change, what they want, what we want, and we have that conversation.
Okay.
In the end, ultimately, it comes a recommendation to this board from us, board staff, with a recommendation on what we think should happen. And ultimately, it is your decision.
Is there a mechanism in place if the agency wanted to speak directly to the board?
Always.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, as long as we have a
always-
procedure so that the agency, if they would,
The example that I would give to that is the logo violation. We would use the process that the board had approved a few years ago, which doesn't require a mediator, but it does require, it's like a 3-page process that we don't put in here, but we reference the contract so that the board has the discretion to determine the outcome and what the result would be.
okay.
But to address Nima's question directly, I'm looking at the Ohio Administrative Code now, and the OMAS mediation service, according to the code, is only available for non-renewal or a substantial change. So 8.8, which refers to other disputes, it could be termination because they didn't do what they were supposed to do,
Right. Yeah,
then
no, I
it
get-
wouldn't be available anyway. So you wouldn't want to reference that in 8.8.
Right. So my question is, if it's really our decision, what does 8.8 add?
It doesn't add any, first of all, I want to retract that. It was ported in, it was part of this contract to begin with. Let's start with that. to help us understand that there are disputes outside of the renewal, non-renewal process
Yep.
that needed some guidance, there just wouldn't be an arbitrary decision without a conversation.
It was ported from that part of the agreement to this part of the
Right.
agreement, so it's consistent.
So just layout, I mean, it was
Well,
groupings, I guess is probably a better way of grouping all
But,
these
but,
different
but what it
pieces of
adds
program.
is a informal process before, at least as I read it, that the parties should engage in before they engage in a formal process, which would be litigation, because there's no arbitration clause, there's no mediation. I think that's what it's intended to do, is require some sort of informal, let's try to work this out before we go to DEFCON 5.
So maybe, okay, it says engaging in dispute resolution procedures and negotiations to resolve disputes. So that's what's contemplated. So, okay, all right.
Well,
I mean, maybe adding the word informal, if that's what we're thinking, but this is something we do anyway, right?
okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I think you'd want to leave it so that if the party said, let's go hire a mediator, they could go hire a mediator. And I
well,
think
that sounds like that's not really what Scott's.
Well, we would have to agree to that. I'm not ruling that out. It's our decision to make is what I'm saying.
Right.
We don't want to push every decision that the board has the authority and responsibility to make into a mediation process.
Oh, for sure.
So the option is there, there may be times where we as a board may want to hire and say, you know what, let's do mediation in this particular case.
But you can't force, if it's not in a contract, there's no obligation to do it. You can't force somebody to mediate.
Right, but, well, this is supposed to be an informal, we're gonna work this out.
Yeah, but still, my only point is if they're not contractually bound, we can certainly make that suggestion, but they can say no. And
Right.
there's nothing we can do with that.
Well,
But I will step away from it.
well, a mediation, only works if both parties want to do it anyway. So you can't have.
Well, unless you have a contractual obligation to mediate. But
This
I just,
preserves flexibility for the board to follow mediation or not, depending on your decision.
you can't force somebody else.
Are there any other comments, questions regarding this or? Okay, Frank, did you want to finish walking this through or?
I'm pretty done.
You're pretty much done? Okay, are there any comments, questions, concerns?
This is informational. So,
And this is the proposed contract for the next fiscal year, and we're likely to have in the next fiscal year, a new proposal for the following fiscal year.
Yes.
so just a little bit further into that. So we're giving the agencies notice that these are our proposed changes. I am positive the agencies are going to push their changes to their attorneys and they're gonna come back with some comments and we're gonna, get those comments, we're gonna percolate over them, we're gonna meet and have a conversation about them and then make suggested revisions based on that conversation. Obviously, Frank will have, a part in drafting changes. And those changes then come to the board for final approval of the contract. We're taking this in stages, as Frank indicated. We know that there's some additional changes that we would like to make, but we didn't want to take everything at once. So we'll do 23 and then we'll take some the other changes that are on our radar screen for 24 and present those.
And we have one contract all of this process and procedure results in one contract that we utilize consistently in terms of the general language with all of our,
One caveat to that.
okay.
The ZEP contract will be inclusive of responsibilities related to 5122 that the other agencies aren't necessarily responsible for.
Thank you.
Okay,
Do we want to do an open session first?
that's what I was thinking. That
Yeah,
would be better.
I can do that.
Okay.
Because I think we might have a couple of folks that want to say something.
Okay, great. We're gonna move now into open session. So, any comments? Yes, Richard? Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Sheila Wilson, and, I want to talk about disputes. I have many disputes, for example, a dispute with the, Unison, a dispute with mental health, a dispute with the State Department of Mental Health, and with the dispute against the MRDD system and the dispute against the State Department of DD. Because I have a developmental disability and I'm falling through the cracks of the system. They've all wrongfully diagnosed me. The mental health system has wrongfully diagnosed me, the psychiatrist, the state hospital has wrongfully diagnosed me. They don't have a correct diagnosis. I was born with my disability at birth. I was born with cerebral palsy. I grew up in learning disabilities and special education classes. I have an IEP and an MFA. Nobody isn't taking that into consideration, And I need skilled rehab therapy. What about funding for speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, aquatic therapy, and funding for things like aquatic therapy and ear, nose, and throat doctors and neurologists. We need those things in the system too, in the public system. Because when you go to the private system, your insurance takes you to a certain number of times and then you're out of the system. We need more long-term therapy. And I got into a dispute with my case manager today because she keeps on judging me that I'm mentally ill and I'm not. And my guardian, he keeps on judging me. He says I'm mentally ill and I'm not. I have a developmental disability and that's the truth. And it's like, I want to take everybody to court and sue everybody, and I don't have to end up using that as my last result, last result is going to court and suing everybody. I don't have money to sue, but, sometimes I want to sue my birth hospital, but the statute of limitations right on me for injuring me at birth and causing my brain damage. And, that's what it's like.
Wow, we really appreciate you coming in and expressing all your disappointments in the system and whatnot. I think that the right place probably for us to start would be for you to, if you would, have somebody help you maybe document and put some of this together in a document. It doesn't have to be fancy and it doesn't have to be, I don't want you to feel intimidated by that process or anything.
Yeah.
But it helps to see it in some sort of document form. I often said sometimes a crayon is the best tool. So whatever works for you, if you could do that, and then we will look into seeing how we can help you best.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
You.
And I like your meetings. They're really nice. I'm gonna come back to more of your meetings.
Well, thank you. Well, this is an incredible group of people that are here to serve. So. Thank you, Sheila. I'm not sure. We need some direction here. I think she's got.
She's got you, Richard. Okay, at last week's zoning and planning committee, they approved a 4-unit residential facility for the mentally ill at 353 Parker Avenue. That's on the east side. I believe it's near the corner of Star and East Broadway. It's Teresa Gaddis's, she's the city council member of that area. She said she had never heard of this group before. It's Calvin Jenkins and Kimberly Harris, and they have something called J&H Caring Hearts. I've never heard of them before. I can tell you it's been at least 10 years since we've had one of these approved. And just as an observation, it was a very long agenda. And she brought a man in a wheelchair with her, but he became highly agitated and the staff member took him out and they did not return. When it reached their turn on the agenda, I think they talked maybe 10 minutes. The plan commission members asked the staff, has anyone objected to this? They said no. Of course, it's all posted through the neighborhood, you know, this facility is going to go up. So it took them about 10 minutes. They approved it and it'll go to city council on March the 16th. I've never heard of this group, but I know that they have to submit to this board their licensure from the Ohio Department of Mental Health. So we'll see what happens with that. And just on a personal note, I've never seen anything like what I saw last week at City Council. Now, for the first 2 weeks of February, they were to have all of their budget meetings. These are all the city departments. Most of them first week were canceled because of the weather. So they were meeting both morning and afternoon over at City Council, all the city departments. If you're wondering how many members of the general public showed up to testify, you're looking at them. I think the Department of Transportation, one lady was there, and I don't think she took her coat off. She just stayed for a few minutes and left. But as far as showing up, addressing all 12 of the council members, as well as city department heads and representatives of the mayor's office, nobody showed. And given the amount of money, something like $180 million that they're getting from the federal government, I was very disappointed. And I know that over the next year, both the city council and the mayor will get countless complaints. Why did you fund this? Why did you not fund this? But when it came time to testify, nobody was there. And of course, they had spirited conversations about everything from why are we seeing so many people with mental health and drug and alcohol in our jails, to what are we going to do for the children who have been traumatized by the COVID virus and are going to need long-term psychiatric care. So just an observation that we're not seeing a lot going on over at City Council as far as community input, but as far as our council members, they're doing their job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that update. Do you have anyone else? Great. Before we go into executive session, Scott, do you want to give us your report?
Yeah, I just have two things in the interest of time. First, we do know that the state legislature has passed the virtual meetings, allowing us to go back to virtual meetings. Was included, I think, in House Bill 61. That is on its way to the governor's office, and with an emergency clause that will allow us to go back into virtual meetings should we decide to. One virtual meeting that we know we want to have is the March board meeting. Assuming the governor signs it, he's got 10 days to sign it once it hits his desk, but all indications are he's going to. And here's the reason why we want to do a virtual meeting in March for the board meeting only, is that we also then want to roll into a community forum. So that it'll be easy, and that'll be a virtual community forum. So it'll be easier for everybody to participate in that forum if you're at home in your own space. And so that's our plan for the March meetings. We will probably have, we can talk about this, but I'm going to propose, if it's approved, we do a virtual meeting for the executive and nominating committee at the end of February. And then we have a face-to-face March 1st planning and oversight committee. Because as you guys know, I think we get better participation and crosstalk in the room, when we're in the room together. Obviously, it's your decision. We will do whatever you want to do. But that would be my recommendation. We do an executive nominating committee, whatever that last Tuesday in February is. Then we roll into the March, I believe it's a March 1st Planning and Oversight Committee meeting. And then on March 15th, we do a virtual trustee meeting. And then immediately following that meeting, we have a community forum, which would be virtual. Is that okay? That makes sense?
So the first is in person, the February and the March 15 are virtual.
Right.
We're gonna put all that out, right?
We'll do all that. Just wanted to kind of get you.
Next Tuesday would be, I think,
Next Tuesday is the last of the month.
Tuesday.
Okay, well, we have one, maybe 2 or 3 items on that agenda. One of which is the completion of my executive director evaluation. So, we're just trying to clean up some CO2 stuff that needs to get in there before we do our desk audit. So this stuff has to kind of work into place. So that's all I had as far as an executive or director's report.
Thank you. That will be, I ask for a motion to go into executive session.
I move.
Second, thank you, Linda. Thank you, Lisa. And can we do a roll call, please?
Mr. Arnold,
Abstain?
Ms. Banks,
Yes.
Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yeah.
Ms. Carter. Yes. Mr. Janai,
Yes.
Reverend Gordon,
Yes.
Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Howe,
Yes.
Mr. Knowles,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Stangle,
Yes.
Major White.
Yes.
For those of you at home or in the audience, when we come out of executive session, we do not anticipate having any additional business. So you're more than welcome to stay if you want, and rejoin us once we come back in, or you're welcome to leave. So